Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harary. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, The Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
Okay, everybody, and welcome back. We are launching season 2 of our Founders Dilemmas podcast. I am here with the one and only Dean Wasserman. Dean, I'm excited to be doing another season with you. And before we jump in, reflections on season 1.
It's been a blast to go through the full life cycle of founding with you. We started off last season, and this is what we're going to revisit a little bit more deeply. We started off last season with pre-founding. So the foundation that you're building before you even leap in is pretty important to think about and plan ahead of time. But then we followed our protagonists, a bunch of the famous ones, a bunch of ones that people haven't heard about before, but that have some insights for us. Followed them all the way through the life cycle of getting together the right people, being able to grow, being able to accelerate their growth if they chose to do that, how to be able to think through you, your motivations, the characteristics of the venture, who you might be able to involve to be able to help you heighten your potential within it. But as we saw on a recurring basis, how it heightens risks also. And if you're not prepared for them, then that's where you find the high rate of failure within startups. And then we took it all the way up through exit. We took it through founders who were getting to a finish line, trying to decide whether they should personally exit, whether the venture should exit through a sale or through an IPO. And so we were able to see a whole bunch of the late outcomes that founders plant the seeds early on and be able to follow a whole bunch of them throughout that entire life cycle.
For sure. And for those of you who haven't yet, please check us out at Founders Dilemmas podcast and listen to season 1. Okay, let's begin our season 2. So Dean, what do you have for us today?
So today we're going to go back to the way beginning when you're planting the seeds, when you're erecting the foundation that is going to be possibly shaky or will be strong, but we're going to take a different look at it than we did last time around. Last time we looked at it through the lens of the Wantrepreneur, the founder who is actually founding at this point, and looked at a bunch of the risks, challenges they face, and how if you take the blessing of time and be able to plan around it, great. But let's take a look at a founder who was a Wantrepreneur and then decided not to found, but that later on in her career, she would do that.
All right.
And so let's call her Carolyn. Back when she was in business school, she was part of a founding team that came in second in the business plan competition at her school and had a whole bunch of things that she was trying to decide at that key fork in the road about what she should do next after she finishes school. One of the co-founders on the team, arguably the most central player on it, decided to run with the venture. She told him, I look forward to joining you in a few years. I'm going to go make my mark in the corporate world first. I still have the juices and the burning desire to be able to become a founder, and I look forward to joining you. And so she decided as she's leaving school, she was taking that corporate job, and she was also starting a family. She had told her husband that, we'll be students for a couple of years while I'm in school, but then once we're out, we'll be able to start, get a house, be able to get a whole bunch of the things that are all the dreams that we had always had about what life was going to be like. And so they bought that house, they took on the mortgage, they had the first child come along, and they took on a nanny to help watch the children. And she's starting life in that corporate job. And so a pretty nice life that she was having coming out of there. However, this is where suddenly the intentions and the grand plans when you're heading out from school or from whatever stage of life you're in when you were planning it, come and hit some of the realities of the actual life that lead you to defer it. So let me tap a little bit of data about founders. I'll do it through the lens of first my students when I survey them, but then also some of the data that I had collected on thousands of founders and thousands of their startups and a bunch of the details on them. When we take a look at what my students were aspiring to do, 68% of them, and this is again the ones who are opting to do a Founders Dilemmas course. They're declaring they are entrepreneurs, that they're planning to do founding. 68% of them said that within 7 years of graduation that they planned to found. And so they armed themselves with the knowledge of how to do a lot of the planning through the course. And then they were going to fill in some of their holes by doing several of the things that we talked about last time around, the career readiness and making sure those career circumstances are going to be there. But what happens when there's the actual? What it turns out to be is that only 17% of people found within those first 7 years. And so the grand plans hit some kind of deferral, some kind of reality of what is going to become the barriers they didn't expect between you and founding. And we can look at Carolyn to see some of the things that are one of the ways in which we have to think differently about that deferred founding compared to what she was doing and compared to what is the natural inclination. There's nothing she did that was unusual. Those are all the things that people typically do when they're heading out of school, when they're taking their first jobs. All of the other ways in which she was acting were totally natural. But unfortunately, only later did she come to appreciate it. And unfortunately, this is what a lot of people come to regret, and why the deferred founding becomes even further off for them, or becomes never founding. A lot of those natural actions incrementally put pieces in place that will prevent you from becoming a founder. And so, for instance, within the home life, she took on what we might call a high personal burn rate, a phrase that we had used back when we did the first episode of the first season. But this is where we can see it firsthand with the deferred founder. But she took on that high mortgage. She took on a whole bunch of expenses like the nanny and other people like that. And because of that, when you are going to become a founder, you're going to join a founding team, join a startup, your paycheck is going to be a lot lower, or it might be zero if you are a founder in the early days. Mm-hmm. And she had become used to that very nice lifestyle. She and her husband also, they'd become very used to it. And looking at the dramatic change that it would introduce if she were to go into startup land at that point was going to be a real hit to them, compared to if they had had a very different lifestyle coming out of school. It was still the starving student lifestyle, and a lot easier for them to become founder, low salary, and the other profiles that come with it without having taken that on. And so over time, she put on a whole bunch of what you could call golden handcuffs onto herself. The gold that she needed to be able to sustain that lifestyle, to be able to do the things that they liked and wanted to be able to continue doing. Those would have to be sacrificed if she were to head into a startup, become a founder, and all the grand plans that she had for them back then. And so that was part of the stuff on the personal side that she created for it. And then when you are doing well in a company, the last thing they want you to do is leave. When you're becoming a contributor, when you're becoming valued within the company, they are going to put their own golden handcuffs on you. They're going to give you possibly some stock in the company that vests over a certain number of years. You have to stay in the company to be able to earn it. And I experienced this myself when I was working, when I became a principal at the firm that I was at, the practice that I had founded, they would give you stock in the company each year, and it would keep being a rolling set of stock that you would get. You would have to stick around for a few years to earn what you just got this year. And then next year you'd get another chunk, because when they see that you're a valuable player, they want to make sure that you're going to have all the incentive and the carrot to stick around. And the same kind of thing that Carolyn was experiencing. The golden handcuffs at work, in addition to the, if you will, the golden mansion that she had created, became a golden jail for her, that were keeping her from being able to found. And so those are several of the things that we have to think a little bit more deeply about when we have those grand plans of the Wantrepreneur, and being able to make sure that we don't cause a whole bunch of those problems of creating the handcuffs and the jail that by just doing what seems natural turns out later on to be something that we're going to regret later.
Yeah. And I wonder, the question when you think about it is, when is that appropriate or not? Meaning, I can imagine many times there's people that want to be founders because they go to the right class, hang out with the right people, and in the world of academia, that may be more exciting and cool, and they may be identifying with more college either grads or dropouts that make it big than getting a normal corporate job. But really, they're not meant to found. Really, they don't have, like we spoke about last season, the chops to see it to the end. And they really will be a much more productive member of society as a member of a larger company. And then when they get out and life becomes more real, or their bills start to increase, they start to realize that. And I wonder what someone can do to discern that along the way. right? There are those that have put golden handcuffs on, either because, like you said, of their burn rate, or because they just made a lot of money. Or right, it could be that their burn rate isn't high, but they just got paid a lot of money. And at some point, every time they look at leaving, they go, I can't give up, the next bonus, or like you said, the next stock investment, or the next promotion that's coming my way. Psychologically, I'm on some kind of race, and because I live in a bubble, my mind sort of comes into the world that I'm in, and it creates the context in which I live in. And all of a sudden now the managing director or the partner or the principal become the most important thing in the world. And so whereas in college I had larger visions, here I have spent so much time in this ecosystem that now my dreams have changed. So how does one do that? And I think that's really what you're getting at, which is how does one along the way know when they start to move into a corporate world and they start to get regular jobs, whether they're selling out and putting on golden handcuffs, or whether they're doing what's right and they're actually being more productive, because it's hard to be an entrepreneur. And when you're out in the real world and you got to pay bills, you don't, the whole, will I become Mark Zuckerberg, those ratios start to become realer. And then when you're anyways a starving student, then you might as well swing for the fences. So how does one know along the way?
Yeah, so you're bringing up actually two things. So first off, I'll tackle that question, but to highlight one of the things that you were doing, I was focusing on the financial handcuffs, but you just brought in several of the non-financial ones, the intangible handcuffs that come on. One of them is when you have the prestige side of it, the title that I have within my company, and the name of the company itself. A lot of times it can pass the mom test. What does your son do, or what does your daughter do? And they just say the name. They work for Goldman Sachs. Okay, great, big success. Then leave Goldman Sachs and start a startup that no one has ever heard of. Doesn't pass the mom test. Yep. And so there's the name of the company, the prestige, and the prestige handcuffs that those might encounter there. And then as you're talking about with the promotion, the titles and things like that, as you're going up the ladder, that's the other intangibles that can be connected a little bit to the financial if you get a raise because of the promotion. But otherwise, it's also that you're getting to the higher reaches on the ladder in that corporation. And it's going to be a lot less clear within a startup. Progress in your own career progression and other things that might also be the intangible handcuffs that would keep you within the corporation. In terms of being able to feel your way, one of them is, just like Carolyn did, being able to try each of the options. So she, when she was in business school, try out the founder life, be able to do that company that she entered into the business plan competition, and that ended up becoming founded also, but without her. She tried that out, and then she tried the corporate life also. Corporate life, she felt pretty bottled up, actually. The thrill that she had had within the startup, the impact that she could have when they were creating from scratch. She had tried that out and seen that thrill. Was there anything in the corporation that might come close to that? Creating a new product within this larger umbrella of a company that has loads of products and lots of ways in which it's going to become a piece, but only a piece, versus it's the entire thing that you were founding when it's the entire company. And so she was trying each of those two out to see where she fit better. And for her in particular, it reminded her of the thrill of the startup days. Mm-hmm. And so that reinforced her desire to do it, but yet the handcuffs were preventing her from doing it. Another way to do it, and this is actually something that academia is just starting to head into a little bit, is understanding the role that part-time founding might play also in being able to get a taste while still keeping a foot in the corporate life. And so the academia calls hybrid founding. We always have to recreate within academia a new term for something that's much more easily understandable with layman's terms. So let's go with part-time founding as the term for it.
Usually have to give it to someone has to claim it also. It's like, the Smith version, like someone's got the Smith theory of hybrid founding. Like someone's got to put their name on the new term as well. So then you're totally academic.
No, absolutely. Just to take a slight detour, someone was asking me about this new concept that they had heard of. I hadn't heard that term. It was just coming out, but it was exactly what had been around in the 1950s and was called X, and then came back in the 1980s. It was called Y. Right. And now it's coming back. It's called Z. And so, yes, there are ways in which the brand building and other things.
You can put Latin in, or that you win. You know what I'm saying? Somehow to throw a Latin term in there, it's over.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I guess Founders Dilemmas was still out there for us to seize and be able to make that our own and things like that. But in terms of the part-time founding, just to tap some of the research on it, there's one of the pioneers in that was professor named Tim Folta, who's at Purdue, and with some of his co-authors. What he found is which people are more likely to do the part-time founding as opposed to leaping fully into becoming founders. And people, interestingly, this would hit on Carolyn a little bit. People with more education and more employment success were more likely to wade into the waters rather than diving into the waters. If they had less experience in the entrepreneurial context, a little bit less surprising. But if you've done it before, you've seen what a startup is like by riding through a whole bunch of the pieces of it, then you're more likely to be having the confidence that you can dive in and rather than having to wade into it. If you're founding in a different industry, and that's one of the other things that we'll get into a little bit about the choice of, do I do it within my same industry that I have experience, or do I found in a new industry? For people who want to found in a new industry, they're more likely to do it part-time rather than diving in fully. And then there's also an interesting thing in terms of the handcuffs that we talked about with Carolyn. They also found that once you get to 5 years with your employer, you're much more likely to not dive in fully, but to wade into the waters and do it part-time. And so some interesting early things about how you can feel your way through that hybrid option, the in-between of not having to give up completely the paycheck and go dive right into founderdom, but instead be able to wade into those waters. One of the other things that I would add on that they didn't really take a look at within there is also what your aspirations are for the venture. If you expect this to be a rocket ship, if you think that this is going to be in a very competitive industry and that you need to grow it quickly and things like that, doing it part-time is going to slow you down.
Yeah.
And so you're taking a big risk if you misread the potential within the venture, and turns out that this is a competitive industry where you're going to have a lot of people who are also charging after that same opportunity. And if you part-time it, you might be having zero in the end of the day, as opposed to if you had taken a dive in full-time to do it, where you can really accelerate by having the full focus and being able to fully dive. Or is this a lifestyle business? Is this one of the ones that it can be slow, you can grow, you're not going to be facing that slamming window or anything like that? And so that's one of the other things to be able to feel your way through. Do I have to do it full time, dive in and give up the corporate paycheck? Or can I do it part time and wade into those waters instead?
Yeah, it sounds to me that whatever choices that people take, the more deliberate they are and the more introspective they are, the better it'll be. Because I could see the benefits both ways. Meaning I can see the benefits in specifically going hybrid and using the hybrid model as a test to see how dedicated you are, right? If you find yourself, nights and weekends, and many people work in jobs, where, not everybody, but many people work in jobs in which they have plenty of non-job time. Like, I think that we're not living in a time where people are getting up and working in the 18-hour days. Some people are, but most people that are working in normal corporate jobs have time. And if you take out like hobby, sports, movies, gossip, tons of sleep, the weekends, and I have to chill and I'm burnt out and you take all that out, right? And you put in hybrid startup time, there's plenty of time. Now, is it enough time to launch a rocket ship? No. But is it enough time to see if you are actually dedicated to this startup? I believe so. And so sometimes when people want to launch startups, what they really want to do is they want to quit their job. And the way they say they want to quit their job is they got to create something else to do. But really what they want to do is not to go somewhere. They want to leave somewhere. And that's a dangerous thing to do, because you leave and then, 2 weeks into starting your job, you're like, I didn't want to do this. But I think if you're in that space where you're not sure, if you're sure, then you got to make a decision. But if you're unsure and you're in a corporate job, to me that sounds like the best approach, which is start doing it from a hybrid perspective for the first few months, and then see if you're procrastinating in your new hybrid role. If you're more excited to catch the game than it is to work on your startup. And that, I think, will be very indicative of whether or not you have what it takes to live and breathe a startup and build that sort of bridge out. So I think this hybrid approach could be very beneficial to people, but at the end of the day, at some point, you can't launch anything part-time. Like, at some point, unless you hire people, but at some point in the evolution of anything in life, if you're constantly being torn between A and B, something's going to give.
Yeah. So one of the things that you're hitting on is does the passion continue once you get into the 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the venture and things like that? It can also cut in the other way also. A lot of people hear the advice of figure out what's your hobby and make that passion into what your job is. And yet it might be that you were blinded by your passion for that hobby, and you're hopefully going to be able to find out whether this is really a business.
Yeah.
Are there other people who really want what you make into your hobby over time? Are they willing to pay money for it? Are they going to be able to help you build a sustainable business and things like that? By wading into those waters, A, you can see whether your passion is sustained, but B, you can also see whether your passion has blinded you. And actually, great hobby, keep it as a hobby. Don't do it as a business and make it into what you're hopefully going to have as the thing that's coming in with your paycheck. The last one I just want to tee up in terms of this pre-founding side is what we were talking about before with your industry versus a different industry. A lot of times you're looking for what is the best opportunity for me to pursue. And it turns out to not be where you have some work experience. Turns out to be in another domain. And those are actually options that come with their own risks. Doing it within your same industry or doing it outside of your industry. And this is where we can maybe tap also some of your legal prowess from your past, Charlie, in terms of some of the problems that founding within your same industry is going to cause for you. Tapping also some other data. There was a researcher named Amar Day who took a look at how often do founders stay within the same industry or move into a new one. In his data, he found that 40% didn't have experience in the industry that they founded in. 60% did have within that industry. But if you think about the same industry, there's some things that are going to be a different type of handcuffs for you. So for instance, when you walk into your job, when Carolyn was walking into her corporate job, day one, she was going to be signing a lot of papers, a lot of times that you don't even take a look at. One of the things that's in there is going to be a non-compete agreement. Yeah. You're going to be assuring this employer that you're not going to take the crown jewels and be able to move into founding by competing with them, creating a company that's going to be head to head with them and other things like that. And so you're going to be signing a paper that assures them that for a year after leaving or however long it's going to be, or within the geography that this company is located in and other things like that, that you're not going to be competing with them. But if you have an idea that you see within that industry and you want to pursue it as a founder, that's going to be a handcuff that can either create major problems for you to found, or when you found and then they sue you because you are competing with them despite having signed a non-compete agreement. Those are going to be some of the things that you have to think more deeply about within that same industry for the 60% of MRB Day's founders who are staying within that industry. And then outside the industry, you move into a different one. There's going to be all sorts of things you can get blindsided by that you don't have the industry experience. You're not going to be ready for the differences compared to what you're used to. There's going to be a lot of the unknown that you're going to be increasing in addition to all the things that we've been talking about throughout. Now, when it comes to the founding challenges and risks and other things like that, a lot of the disconnects that you're going to have between how you think things work in the old industry and how they work in this new one, and a bunch of other things that the experts in the industry would be able to help you think through. And so those are a bunch of the things that you have to think a little more deeply about as you're making that decision about what to found. Is it going to be something that's in my same industry, or is it going to be in a new industry?
I want to suggest, and maybe if people are listening want this, they should email us. We should create one of those, those options charts that show the different paths of what to do. Because as you're talking, there's so many things that pop up into my head. And I just want to throw a couple of them out there. To me, when you're making these decisions, these decision trees, that's so critical. There's no right answer, right? This is, we're not giving people a formula, plug these numbers in, and if it hits over a value, you leave, and if under value, you stay. I think the point of this is to be able to give people the different factors that they should be thinking about, and maybe we should build some tree for them. I think that'd be cool. But let me just throw a couple down for this to think about. First on the hybrid stuff. First on the hobby stuff. You mentioned the hobby concept, and there's two things to think about. There are a lot of people that think they want to do their hobby all day, and they get these memes if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I love it, it's great, and it works for Jerry Seinfeld, and it's great when you hear that Jerry Seinfeld loves comedy, and as a result he never worked a day in his life. But most people, they love their hobby because they never had to turn it into a business. It was a hobby. It never had a financial statement. It never had bills to pay. It never had people to pot. It didn't sweep up after itself. You know what I'm saying? It didn't have an infrastructure called a business that was required to maintain the jewel called the hobby. They just got to do the hobby. So they loved, basket weaving or singing or watching sports or whatever. And I love it. And if I could do it my whole life, it'd be amazing. And maybe you can, but when you build a business and most of your time is spent not doing the hobby, it becomes miserable. And so sometimes when you have a hobby, the best place to grow your hobby, especially if you're post-college or post-graduate school and you're starting your life, sometimes the best thing for someone to do that's good at their hobby is do their hobby for somebody else. Because somebody else gives them the background and pays their bills and makes sure there's health insurance and makes sure that they, that somebody is filling the copier, and then they can do their hobby all day. Right? Like lawyers that have this problem, that lawyers that love being lawyers, that can't spend 5 minutes in a law firm. It's great, but remember, like if you have your own law firm, like there's a lot of non-law stuff that you're gonna have to do. But if you spend 5 years in a law firm and somebody else is making sure that the food was ordered, like you can imagine just how much time you can spend building your passion. And so people that have hobbies sometimes get blinded when life becomes a little bit too difficult in the regular job. And to think through these factors: number one, how much of your hobby will you do? Number two, when are you leaving? And are you doing something that's connected to your hobby enough, or can be connected to your hobby enough, that will give you enough of a leeway so that you become an expert at it at some point, so that when you leave, it'll justify the amount of money you need to build a business around it. The second thing I want to bring up in this hobby conversation, though, which is I've learned this along the way, and I'm curious to your thoughts, and then I want to talk about hybrid for a second. But I want to get your thoughts on this, Dean. I think a lot of people, I think what happens to people, myself included, and I wonder if you're the same way, is Hashem, God bless everyone with certain traits. Like everyone's got stuff. Everyone's got a deck, right? And God gave us all cards. And some cards are good cards, some cards may not, whatever. Everything's a good card, of course. But like, you have what you have. But you only have the experiences that you have. So you take what you're naturally good at and you put it to your life. And if you're born in this community and you go to this school with these many extracurricular activities, with these many great teachers, right? You end up inclining towards getting involved in this club and wanting to be like this professor. And if you have these types of parents or that uncle or that grandmother, you end up, all these mimetic desires begin, and you want to be this and that and this and that, right? Like it just happens to be that you see families where like this, everyone's a lawyer. Like it's not like they were born wanting to be lawyers. Like something happened. Like the fact that mom and dad are lawyers probably had a lot to do with the fact that the kids want to be lawyers. So the exposure plus the inner traits equal what I want to do. And what happens is people mistake their desires in the subject for that's what I want to do, when really what they want to do is they want to be able to express their traits. And they've only had the exposure. Their minds have only been able to see those people in their lives. So they only know that in the expression of traits are in these 4 buckets. They don't know there's a big world out there. And there's lots of nuances of how to express your traits. Like you have no idea that you don't have to become a math professor. You could be a quant trader. And that may be even more exciting to you. Like you don't know that there's a whole pharma industry that you never heard of before because you grew up in a world where dad's the local pediatrician. Like there's so many ways, theoretically, for people to express their inner traits that if they move too quickly into a world of I know what I want, and they don't spend time, and I think between me and you that this is in many ways more powerful than the typical go to a university to try out different subjects and then you can express the world. I think go out to the world and work and take different jobs and work in a company and volunteer and read. And there may be time where a person has to give themselves, even if they have a hobby, if they haven't found it yet, and they have to be exploring where do my traits fit in the current or in the emerging markets to give them the real chance of doing things that are valuable. That's my sense in the value of keeping the corporate job for a while.
Yeah, no, you're raising a big issue that we don't have time to really nail. So let's be able to tackle that in a future episode.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to give you a reflection, as definitely in terms of, you're talking to a person who has made 3 major career pivots in the corporate world and now into academia and things like that. So very much we can talk through a bunch of some of the reflections, lessons, and other things that come from that. But I also won't discount the exploration that has to go on in school, being able
Right.
to have a bunch of toes that you put into a variety of waters, being able to find things that you've never heard about before that you might want to try. For me, when I came into my MBA program at Harvard, I came in with a list of 5 things I could anticipate doing. The first semester knocked 2 of them off the list, added one, and then the summer in between my 2 years added another one. And which do you think I ended up doing? The 2 that weren't even on the list to begin with.
Yeah.
And so being able to, and that was from talking to some of my peers there, being introduced to other industries that I never heard of and roles that I never anticipated that I might like and other things like that. And so how to explore well is a little bit of what you're bringing up, and we can get into some of the ways in which we have to think in a conscious way about it. It's one of the consistent themes that we had throughout the first season, and now we've been doing today. In Hebrew, sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. You're going to act later. Think ahead of time now about how to be able to plan for it. And some of the things that we added on were about the handcuffs with the natural moves you make that are going to preclude your being able to do some of the things you want. Thinking a lot more deeply about it ahead of time is a critical thing. And finding yourself, exploring in the right way is another one of the things that hopefully we'll be able to revisit as we get into future episodes.
Yeah. And let me sort of close this one out. Let me just add one more piece, and then we could really close the episode, which is, you mentioned earlier about the hybrid stuff. If you're going to stay in your industry, it's really challenging from a either legal and or ethical perspective to do so in some industries as a hybrid startup. If you're working in a business and they are entrusting you to use the material to further their goals, it's really difficult to put in a full day's work, an honest day's work, and work hard on something, and then you do the exact same thing later on for yourself. It's possible, but it's hard. So I'll give you an example. Like, let's take law, for example. Like, it's possible to say I'm working at a big corporate law firm, but I'm going to do traffic, or I'm going to do residential sales, because the big corporate law firm ain't going anywhere near residential sales for the most part. So they don't care about the local home, right? And when you're in the room, you got to be doing big corporate transactions. So you could create that, but it's really hard. And you have to be really careful. And there are non-competes. There's lots of provisions that companies have today where they want to protect their information, non-disclosures and whatnot. And you can really trip yourself up. But I think more importantly, just from an ethical perspective, let me say it's an ethical / business. Like, it's not just ethical. Ethical, you're out. We're not even talking ethics. We're talking about just smart. If you end up leaving and they realize that you built on their backs, it's gonna be hard to be really successful. So my sense is that if you're out there and you're working and you're saying, I love this, I'll do it for myself, better leave than have the problem of doing your job on someone else's information, unless you can create a real Chinese wall, as they say, to create that. But if you're not, if you're in a situation where it's really different, right? You love, sport, I don't know, you love building things and you want to be a builder, and you're working at a desk job, right? And you have nights and weekends when you can leave. That seems like a much clearer approach towards building a hybrid. I'll tell you one last thing, and then I'll stop with this, because there's so many, and we should do a whole nother episode on hybrid, because there's so many options, because I've spent my whole life in corporate America. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is where startup world, and this is like my life. You know what I'm saying? Like, with God's help. Like, sometimes when you're working somewhere, you realize that there's something you could be doing that they don't want to do, but you want to do, which is a complement to their business. And that's a very good niche, because what'll happen is you can build it, they don't want it, and they can be your client. And that's happened to me once. I left corporate America twice to start my own thing, and in both cases was able to go back to my employers and create some relationship that said, hey, can you use me? And they said, yeah, sure, we need that, we know you, and so sometimes the ability to build things that are not exactly the same in your company, but can be complements or necessities of the company. They can totally use that, and you want to do that. And so when you go out and do it, you end up taking them as your first client, and that's a very, very powerful way to get going. Because sometimes it'll be impossible to get a client this size as a startup. So landing a big client, which could be your previous employer, even in a small way, could be a huge step forward for your business, right? You go right away in with a major client on your side, and sometimes even allies in the corporate suite that can help you. So I think, to sum up, the answer here is, and we should really maybe build this, sort of decision tree chart together. But I think that what I'm taking from what you're saying and what I think was where we're going, which is these are complex decisions that people make, I think, a little bit too flippantly. And so being able to track your thinking and then being able to look at your options and be able to test your assumptions and check your gut will be critical in making the best decision. When you're post-college and you wanted to be that entrepreneur and now you're in the game, to be able to really think through, are these handcuffs or is this the right decision? Do I leave? How do I leave? What? These are major life moves that you don't get a lot of. You can make them, you just can't make a ton of them. Especially if you're in a good corporate job. So thinking through them and making the deliberate decision, I think, will be critical.
Yeah, I agree. Let's tackle a bunch of these further.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions, of course, you can reach out to us at foundersdilemmaspodcast@gmail.com, and we can't wait to see you next time.